Hey guys, I wanted to take a look at the create context function. This is new in React 16.3 and it's the new way to do context. So I have a little example right here that's going to show you how it's working, and then we're going to take a look at a few of the things that can be a little bit tricky. So first off, I have made a separate file called count context where I am just calling react.createContext. And you can actually pass in as parameters what you want the default value to be. So right now I have no default value, but if I wanted to, I could say Bob. If I wanted to be a string, I could give it a number, give an object, whatever I want. I could set a default value there. So then in my index.js, I am importing the count context. And this is basically the entry point to my application. So here I am wrapping my entire project in this thing called count context.provider. And so what this does is now anywhere in my application, anywhere between these two providers, I can then access the value of the provider, no matter how deep in the tree structure or how far away it is. So this is kind of an alternative to like just passing the props. So I have like container 1 here and container 2. I'm not passing it any props, but what I could pass it is, for example, the count if I wanted to. But this will allow you to, if I have a child node or child component that's really far away, I don't have to keep passing the props down. Okay, so what is this example right now? So I have some state here in my application. I have text for my input and count, what you see right here. So I have two functions, increment to increase the count, and then onChange, which is handling when I type. So here you'll notice I am passing in the value of count and the value of increment, or the function increment. So now anywhere in this application I can get what the current count is, or I can call increment to increase the count. So I can call from any child, I can call the increment function, which will update the state. So now I'm also rendering here an input, and this is just a regular input. There's nothing special about it. We'll get to why I have that here in a little bit. Displaying the count, which is right here. And then I have two things, container 1 and container 2. Container 1 is this increment button. Container 2 is this thing right here. So let's look at container 1 real quick. So the purpose of this is to just show you container 1 is just a div, and then we have count button at the very bottom. And see how I'm able to access the increment function two components down, right? So this is not directly rendered inside of index, it's rendered in container 1. But I can import the count context, and notice how I have basically a central count context, which I import from both. And then I say count context.consumer, so instead of provider. So this is how you access it. And this is a rendered prop where we get a function here, and the parameter is the value of the provider. So I'm destructuring it to just get the increment, but you could just have a variable there and access it. And then you can see I'm just rendering a button that has increment. So now if I were to click the button increment, you'll notice it will increment the counter right here. It also increments the counter there, because if we look at container 2, I'm rendering a count value, and count value is getting the value of count using the same method, the consumer. So these are two components, and other sides, basically they're not close together at all, are both being able to access the count context. And I'm getting the value of count and displaying it. Now I'm also console logging right here, so we can see whenever this function is being rendered. Okay, so that's a basic idea of how context works. I kind of want to go into some things that might cause problem, because a lot of people are jumping to remove Redux or MobX in their application to use this instead. And I like the idea of that too in places where I'm using GraphQL heavily. And I don't need Redux a lot, or I don't need MobX a lot. I don't have to install another library. I can just use context. But the thing about it is Redux and MobX are optimized to not re-render, or at least only render when they need to, or re-render when they need to. Whereas you can get into some problems with count, or with the context, if you're not careful. So take a look how I set this up. So I'm actually re-rendering count container 1 and count container 2 because they're regular components every single time I update the state. So if we look at the console, every time I increment here, you'll notice container 1 and container 2 are being rendered every single time. So what's happening is it just causes a chain reaction. So it's re-rendering there, and then it's re-rendering down in count button and so on. So I'm going to change these to pure components now, and that will solve at least these guys re-rendering. But if you're just using, for example, local state, you can easily have some components in here that are not pure functions or pure components, which you have to be careful about, because then they're going to be re-rendering every single time you update the state, or in this case I'm updating the context, really just my count value, but because it's in local state it re-renders everything. So adding that though, that will solve that next problem. But notice how count value is rendering still, which is completely fine, right? Because we're incrementing. But there's a particular caveat that they mention in the documentation for this that I thought was quite interesting. So it says, do not do it like this. Pass an object in as the value because it'll cause unnecessary re-renders. And that's exactly what I'm doing right here. This was basically just my initial gut instinct to code it like this, and it's bad. And let me show you why it's bad. So I'm typing here, right? And this has no effect, or should have no effect, on the context value, and it doesn't. Notice how count is the same, increment is the same, nothing changes, but I'm re-rendering this component because I'm calling onChange, and onChange calls setState. So what's happening is, because I'm passing in a new object, it's re-rendering count value because it's going to be a new object every time, which is kind of interesting. I was thinking about how I would get around this. How would I be able to pass an object in like this that also includes a function like this? Because it makes sense to just pass in this dot set state, or this dot state, if the value is, an object that has just values in it, like count or whatnot. So I was wondering if I should now keep this function in the state as well to avoid re-renders. So maybe something like this, where I have my constructor, and of course we'll say super, and now I'm going to create my state in here, and we're going to say this dot state. But now instead of count like this, maybe I say context state, and then I put inside of there my count, and then also increment, which is equal to this dot increment. And I don't know if this actually even works. We can try right now, or if this is a good way to do it, but I would want to say now context state, and we can move this up, and I'm going to be updating the count, and I'm going to keep dot dot dot. Sorry, it keeps jumping to the bottom for some reason. I guess it needs to have my text there when typing. So this dot state dot context state. Okay, so let's look at this. So now every time I increment, I am updating the context state. I'm keeping the context state that was there before, and adding incrementing the count. Now I'm spreading this afterwards, which is bad. I should have that at the beginning. Okay, and then now instead of this dot state dot count, I'm going to say this dot state dot context state, and then instead of count here, I'll say context state dot count as well. So now I'm going to try incrementing. Okay, that did not work because this needs to be dot context state dot count as well. And I'll increment. And okay, so it seems to be incrementing fine. But the real test now is, can clear that. So it's re-rendering, which it should be because count is increasing. But now if I start typing, notice how it is not re-rendering. So it worked exactly how I wanted it to. Because it really makes no sense why count value all the way down here would re-render if we're just making local changes here. So these are some things to keep in mind when using the context. You can easily add in extra renders, which can be damaging and really slow down your application. If you're using Redux or MobX before, you might notice a performance hit when switching to this if you're not careful. So I guess how you want to do it now is to store your like context state in the state, and then also even your functions like this. So yeah, so this is just some things I was trying out with context, but all this stuff is on Code Sandbox if you want to come check it out. Let me know what you guys think of the context API, or if you've had trouble with it, or what your thoughts are. I think it's pretty neat, but as I said, it can kind of mess you up sometimes, so I might still just use Redux or MobX when I need it. But that's it for this video, guys. Thanks for watching.